What in the world is damage restoration? I've spent almost the past decade within restoration, and I still have to spend minutes explaining to everybody that I speak to what industry I come from. And if you're an industry veteran, you probably feel the same pains too. And if you're new to the restoration industry, I hope that this video can kind of paint a picture of what this wonderful industry actually is. I've spent the past decade growing and scaling a restoration company with my dad from his garage to over 8 figures. Literally did everything from the groundwork of extracting sewer water from people's basements to, strategically growing and scaling this company. Afterwards, we found a technological problem within the industry and decided to embark on this adventure to build Albiware, which is a restoration industry specific technology. And I also wrote a book called Restoration Millionaire, which is dedicated to restoration contractors on how they can grow and scale their business. So I want this video to be shared with the world so that way when we say damage restoration, people actually know what the heck we're talking about. So let's dive in. So the restoration industry is a subset of the property service industry. So if you think about people that are plumbers, electricians, work on homes, restorers kind of do the same thing. They basically work on properties, whether they're commercial properties or residential properties. But there's something a little bit different about damage restoration contractors versus any other contractor in that they typically show up to a home after some sort of catastrophe has happened. Whether that's like a leaky toilet that basically floods the entire basement of a property, or a house fire that burns a house significantly, or maybe it's a mold infestation that happens in a skyscraper. Restoration contractors respond to those types of damages, and their main mission is to protect the property from further damage and then restore it back to its pre-loss condition. I think there's somewhere between 50 to 100,000 restoration contractors throughout the entire United States, and I anticipate that the gross market volume of this industry to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So it's a very, very large industry. And the other unique part is that it's very fragmented. There's a lot of restorers all over the place, and there's not that many large roll-ups or large companies that do restoration. And that's probably why you don't really know typically what restoration is as a household name. Restoration is typically backed by insurance claim payouts. Basically, the restorer shows up to the property in the middle of the night and provides these emergency services. They don't know how much it's going to cost. Think of like the emergency room of property damage. And then 3 to 5 days later, when they're done, they submit this invoice to the homeowner that the homeowner takes and submits to their insurance company. The insurance company then haggles with the restoration contractor and the homeowner, and then eventually remits this claim payout to the homeowner, which then is used to pay the restoration contractor off. So unlike typical trades like a plumber who shows up and gives a price to the homeowner, does some quick work and swipes a credit card, in restoration, contractors have to actually justify what they're billing for, and they have this entire time window where they're haggling with the insurance company and the homeowner to try to recoup their funds for the work that they did. The second interesting part about restoration, what is very unique unlike other industries, is actually the equipment that is being used during the projects. So restoration contractors show up and they do the labor of extracting water or cleaning up the initial part of the loss, but then afterwards they drop off these pieces of equipment like air movers and dehumidifiers and air scrubbers, and those pieces of equipment run at the property for 5 to 7 days until the property is dry, and then they get picked up. And those pieces of equipment get added to the bill, which is a little bit different than most other industries. And then the third part that is unique about restoration is actually the larger contract sizes. So the average job that a restorer will provide will be roughly around $8,000 to $12,000, whereas the average plumbing job is roughly around $2,000 to $3,000. So there are larger contract sizes within the restoration industry. So the second thing I want to talk about is how restoration companies earn their work. And I actually talk about it in my book, and I explain to people the Restoration Millionaire method, which is a step-by-step guide on how you can actually earn your work as a restoration contractor. The first and most common way restoration contractors start out to earn their work is actually through online marketing. They'll create a Google My Business page, they'll run Google Ads, they'll go on social media and kind of spread the word and digitally acquire customers. And actually it's very effective. Most companies can get to about $1 million of revenue just by doing online marketing. A fun fact also is that water damage cleanup near me is actually the third most expensive keyword on Google. The other two are actually malpractice attorneys and auto wreck attorneys as well. So just to kind of put it in perspective how competitive the online market is within restoration. A small subset of the restoration market actually decides to build direct relationships with insurance companies. So they'll go to a company like State Farm, for example, and say, hey, send me all your work within this area, I'll pay you a percentage. And it actually helps the insurance company as well, because the insurance company is able to save some costs and kind of regulate the claims process. And that's a very small percentage of the industry. Probably about 3,000 to 5,000 restorers actually do that. And these are commonly known as vendor programs or third-party administrators. It's another way that restorers can actually earn work. Since restoration is very hyper-local, restorers also depend and rely on relationships very heavily. They'll build relationships with other tradesmen like plumbers and property managers, and also insurance agents within their local community, and they do that through route marketing. So they'll send out somebody to go out and knock on insurance agents, plumbers, property managers, firefighters' doors, and then build relationships with those parties. And then when those parties encounter some sort of damage to a homeowner's house, they'll actually call the restoration contractor to go out there and help that homeowner in need. The third thing I want to talk about is services offered by the restoration contractors. So sometimes you'll see restoration contractors that are full service or that offer multiple service types. Other times, especially the smaller ones, I recommend that they focus on just one service. So one service type is actually emergency services. So those can be just anything related to showing up to a property within a 1-hour response time to do cleanup services that prevent further damage to that home. So if there's a burst pipe, they'll show up there, turn off the water, remove all the wet carpets, install some drying equipment, spray down some antimicrobial to make sure that there's no mold growth, and then once the property is dry, they'll remove that equipment off of there. If it's a fire, they might show up in the middle of the night to board up the property to prevent them from having somebody come into the property and get hurt, and that is kind of the emergency services there. The second type of service restorers can offer is actually reconstruction services. So after those emergency services are done in the middle of the night, there's all these building materials that are removed from the property and they actually need to put them back together. So they would have a full construction division under their company where they would show up afterwards and put back the carpets that they removed, the drywall that they removed, and fix the house after the damage occurs, and then ultimately bring that homeowner back to that pre-loss condition, which is their actual mission. And a third subset of the industry is actually content services, and it's really cool. It's basically a moving company that focuses only on moving furniture and cleaning furniture after fires, water damage, or mold. So a lot of times restorers that are full service may offer that service on their own, and there's also these specialty companies within the restoration industry that focus on just that. And basically, they show up, they pack up all of the personal items of the homeowner. So imagine all the beds, all the nightstands, all the couches. And after a fire, all of that stuff could be smoky and full of soot. So they bring it to their facility, they process it and clean it all, and they have very advanced technology to do so. And then they keep it in storage until the reconstruction process is done. Once the house is built back together, they take all that furniture and they move it back into the house. And then like another kind of subset of that industry is the textiles industry, which is basically a laundromat that is hyper-focused on getting rid of smoke smell from clothes. And a lot of items right now with the technology that we have are actually salvageable, and restorers can go in even after like a really bad fire and find items that are salvageable and clean them, and it's actually more cost effective than replacing those items. The next thing I want to talk about is adjacent industries, or other industries that are kind of similar to restoration, but I think that they fall outside of the industry. So the first one is actually the exterior damage restoration industry. And they're basically roofing companies that do insurance work. And basically what they do is they show up to people's homes and solicit them, so that way those people sign a contract for a new roof, new siding, new gutters, but it's contingent upon the insurance company actually paying for it because of wind damage, hail damage, and so on and so forth. And they're very different than the fire and water damage restoration industry, so that's why I kind of put them as an adjacent industry, but they're a massive industry that has done a lot within the damage restoration ecosystem. The second one's pretty cool, and you've probably never thought about what happens after a crime scene occurs, but they're actually the biohazard restoration guys. There's companies like Aftermath, for example. They're really large, and Bio1 restoration franchises that focus just on biohazard work. And their job is to basically clean up crime scenes after, people pass away, anything related to, biohazard waste. So anything, think of blood, think of other, matter in that bucket. And basically they go in, they clean up the properties, and it's all related to incidents of biohazard. Now, the third adjacent industry is actually environmental cleanup. So there are certain known harmful building materials out in our properties today that exist, like asbestos and lead, for example, and there's companies that do asbestos and lead abatement. So they're basically moderated by the EPA, and they show up and basically restore a property that maybe has asbestos in their drywall, maybe asbestos floor covering, and there's a specific process that they have to follow to remove that, so that way they don't disturb the material, it doesn't get into the air and then make us sick. So it's a really cool industry also, and it's kind of adjacent to the restoration industry. In fact, most restorers work hand in hand with asbestos and lead remediation companies. The last thing I want to talk about is the restoration company's typical makeup. So how does the organizational structure look? And we'll start from the people doing the work and then kind of end at management and ownership. And just keep in mind, typically these restoration companies are pretty small. And typically you'll find a technician, which is the typical laborer that performs the work, and they typically are IICRC certified. There's this governing body that does a lot of training and regulation for the industry and trains the technicians on how to remove certain building materials, what to do with sewer water versus what to do with clean water, how much equipment is needed, and stuff like that. And the technician typically works alongside with the crew chief, and the crew chief is basically a more senior technician that's responsible for doing most of the documentation and paperwork and things of that nature. The crew chief is important because the restorer has to make sure to document every single step of the process, because remember, if they don't document something, then the insurance company has more leverage to negotiate against the restoration contractor. The next position commonly seen within the restoration industry is a project manager. And a project manager, typically in the emergency services side, is the person that shows up to the homeowner's home, identifies what the cause of the leak is, and helps navigate the homeowner through the process. So they're ultimately sort of like a salesperson that helps acquire the work authorization and get that signed, and then they also act like a liaison between the homeowner and the restoration company. Another really unique position within the restoration industry is actually the estimator position. So Xactimate is actually the software that is the industry standard for the restoration industry. And it's an estimating software that the insurance companies use and the restoration contractors use, and they're able to use that software to negotiate fairly. And these estimators are trained how to use that software. And basically what they do is they plug in all the work that the technicians and the crew chiefs did within the software, and it spits out the price. And then afterwards, they're the ones having the conversations back and forth between the restoration company and the insurance company to agree upon what amount should be reimbursed back to the homeowner. There's also relationship marketers, and these are the people that are responsible for going out and building relationships within the community, so that way the community can refer work to the restoration company. Think of them like business development associates or business development managers. And typically a restoration relationship manager will spend their day having 15 to 20 meetings with different insurance agents, plumbers, property managers, and kind of pitching the value of why they need the restoration company. They'll use something like a CRM, like Albi, to be able to track all their notes, and they're typically paid on a commission basis based on how much they bring in. And then there's operations and management. So typically you'll have, like an office manager that manages the office, an operations manager that's responsible for managing all the production employees. And sometimes in larger companies, although like I said before, there's very few really large restoration companies, you might have department managers and general managers. And even in the larger ones, you'll see VPs and executives of all sorts. But in the smaller restoration companies, typically they're operated by the owner and a lot of times the owner's family. So you'll find that often those positions are all kind of ran by the person who owns the company. So I hope you found this video helpful in explaining to you what the restoration industry is and what it does. Please feel free to share this video with anybody else. I think it does a great job to just give somebody a brief overview over the industry. And if you like this content and you want to hear more, we produce a lot of different videos kind of helping the restoration industry, propelling it forward. So hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, please. Talk to you guys soon.